The budget is not a beautiful thing, but it is an incredibly useful thing. I don't think it's something that is difficult either. Of course, I'd say that. I just think it takes a while to get your head around it and to get into it. But I stand by my statement that it is useful, and it's changed quite a bit over the last few years, so in a very useful way where it is split into tabs per partner organization. So it kind of gives every partner organization a bit of a budget of, right, this is what you're responsible for, that's what you will be doing. But of course, it's only one page, it is only one tab of what is really a very joined up and holistically conceived project, which has a holistically conceived budget. But it's now easier to separate costs out. Anyway, match funding. Of course, you are putting in between 40 and 50% of the project budget minimum. You can put in more and ask the Commission to fund less in terms of that, but it is incredibly important that you balance income and expenditure. At the bottom of the budget form, you must end up with a beautiful, clean, round zero, where the income matches up perfectly with the expenditure. This may mean that you need to shuffle a few euro cents back and forth, and yes, this budget is in euros. The exchange rate changes every month, and for August it's that amount, which may or may not be useful, and it changes. The exchange rate, you'll see it says in the budget form itself, there's even a link in the budget form to itself. You need to be using the rate of the month preceding the publication of the guidelines or something to that effect. It'll be very easy for you to find it. You put in the exchange rate and everything else the spreadsheet does itself. So there's a budget sheet for each of the partner, and this is a really big question. I'll mention that a little bit. No, I'll mention this now. And this is something that I think Jonathan can also talk about, because we've spoken about this. You will want to be strategic about how you build your organization's activities, initiatives, projects into your Creative Europe application, and the same goes for your project partners. You are not expected to be doing something that is completely different from what you do as a visual arts venue, as a festival, as a local authority, but you will want to see how you use existing resources and existing program. If you have an education program that you've agreed with, say, Arts Council England over a number of years, and you're saying, right, hi, Arts Council England, Relationship Officer X, we are looking at an EU funding application, Creative Europe, they will know this. We would like to build some of our education program into our Creative Europe application. The benefits are that, and that. It will double the money, it will quadruple the exposure for English artists, for example, and it will give us access to different markets, and it will allow specialists from Turkey, Estonia, and Germany to come in and see how we do things to help us improve our practice and our work, and so on and so forth. You will want to be smart about how you put in existing resources, elements for which you may have agreed partnerships, for an education program, for an exhibition, for commission, how you build that into your Creative Europe application. That said, a Creative Europe application and project should of course not be a Frankenstein's monster of all of your partners' activities and programs that they will run for 4 years and a beautiful cocktail of all of that. It all does need to make sense.
That's the kind of slightly $64,000 question, which is how do you make sense of it? Because to optimize what, let's call them your contributory costs, the match funding that you'll be providing, you obviously, I'm guessing, want to draw as much as possible on the existing work that you imagine you'll be doing and that you imagine you've already got funded. And therefore, to some degree, you've got to decide how you're going to aggregate that out If it's 3 of you, it's not difficult. If it's 8, it's more difficult. Because then you've got 8 different sets of work programs that are already on the slate. How are you going to make sense of them? So in a way, you've got to decide whether you want to go for the big idea around which you then cut out from each of your planned 4-year work packages what you're going to do, or whether you want to kind of organically grow something and think that the big idea will emerge from a process of knocking stuff back and forth between all your partners. I mean, I call those 2 broad ways of approaching it either an integrated model or a federal model. So the integrated is, right, this is what we're doing, here's the idea, everything has to fit and we all do it, and then it's really simple and really clear. In some ways, that's more straightforward and easier to see and easier to manage. A slightly more complicated way, but if your partners are perhaps very diverse or want different things from the partnership, is that you create a series of work packages where not everyone has to do everything, but you build it around the energies and enthusiasms and points of interconnectivity across the partnership. And then it becomes more federal in that sense than integrated. It doesn't matter which you do, as long as you're really clear about which of them it is, and every partner understands how that works. And it's just a different build process. Forgive me if you understand that already. A couple of things. Maybe we'll come to this, but having Euro bank accounts is a pretty good idea, just because I'm working with 3 partners, 1 French, 1 British, 1 Swedish, so 3 currencies. Having Euro bank accounts makes life just slightly easier. So that's a small technical thing. Another way of thinking about your problem is cost centers. How do you want to articulate cost centers? So do you want to do it according to location, where stuff will happen? Or do you want to do it according to partner? And sometimes they will overlap, but usually go for one or the other.
The budget form is good to look at. Again, this is not something you will want to leave towards later in the partnership development question. You cannot include in-kind contributions, and that is really, really important to know. In-kind contributions is everything that you cannot track in an accounting system, anything you cannot clearly monetize. What does count is staff costs, but that is not in kind because there's a real cost for it. It'll be 60% of a person's salary. Those kinds of things are real costs. You will have timesheets, you will have pay slips. You can trace these things in an accounting system. Anything you can't trace in an accounting system is not eligible for you to put in as income into the budget. So if you're working with volunteers and volunteer time, if the volunteers aren't being paid, you cannot put that into the budget, sadly. However, this comes with a big fat caveat, which means that if you want to donate your rehearsal space 4 times a month, if your partners can activate an army of people who, for no fee, who voluntarily will help out with the festival or something, that is incredibly valued by the program and by the assessors, and it contributes to the strength of the partnership, it contributes to your willingness to make the project happen, and you will be graded for that as well if you make it clear, if you mention it. So if you can activate resources that you have, space, time, energy, but you cannot monetize them, mention that. Don't put it in the budget form, but put it in your detailed project description in bold. The income side, the EU grant requested. So you can ask for up to 50% of the project budget. Up to 60% of the project budget, depending on if you're going in for the large or the small cooperation project. The income can be project income, for example. So the biggest income area will be the EU grant. That might not be. You can also have the project itself make money. If you're working with box office, if you are doing tickets for an event, seminars, or something, these things can and should be reinvested in the project as the partner's contribution to it. If you are printing a catalogue that goes with the exhibition, and that catalogue is being sold, the money, the proceeds from that, the profits for that, should be invested as partnership income so that you don't have to put in quite as much. What can go in, of course, is also own funds, so core funding that you've raised extra, externally, foundations, individual giving. Any legally obtained money is fine. Public, private funding, absolutely fine. You need to be aware also that you do not have to have the money in your account by the time the project begins. You have until the end of the project to put in your partnership income. And not every partner needs to put in the same amount of money either. It will usually be roughly proportionate to the activities, the cost of the activities that they're running. You need to be very, you need to be very good on the budget side of things. You need to run a pretty tight ship. Every partner will run their own accounting for the project, but they will have to flag every single cost. They need to track them in their accounting system and on demand press a button and have a full report of all of the relevant costs and income for the cooperation project costs.
For the form, it will ask you for each partner how much they are going to undertake to commit to the project. So that's binding. You can renegotiate if you need to within a 10% margin, but you would have to find it from somewhere else if you don't want the overall money to change. But you don't have to evidence technically any longer. You used to in the old culture program. You don't have to evidence it. You have to explain in the narrative where it's coming from. So it's anticipated with good reason.
Eligible costs. Now, there are different things that mean eligible, and you will want to be on the right side of eligible very clearly. To be eligible, a cost must have been incurred. That means spent within the project period. Anything you spend before the project begins or after the project is ended is not eligible. The cost must have been planned into the budget as well. It needs to be in the budget form. If a cost shows up, £5,000 for something, and then someone's going to say, this was never in the plan, what was this part of? If something changes, you have extra costs or want to reshuffle costs, you can do that up to a certain amount, but if it's beyond that certain amount, you need to go back to the executive agency and say, right, we are changing the budget because of this, good reason, and it will achieve better things, for example. But you have to make it easy for them to understand why you're doing it. In essence, you need to ask for permission before you make any substantial changes to the budget. They need to comply with any tax and social legislation. They need to work with VAT. If you can claim back VAT and you get VAT back from your costs, you cannot invoice for VAT for the project. So you're not allowed to make money by claiming VAT but not actually declaring it to the project. Your partner's the same thing. If you need to be operating within the VAT rules of each partner country for their costs. Because you're working with EU funding does not dispense you of any obligations, VAT or other. Reasonable, they need to be reasonable, and every country will also have its good financial accounting rules, so you'll want to have your partners check with their accountants before they send you their budget. Identifiable, this is not English. Identifiable and verifiable, this is what I meant before, it must all show up in a good accounting system. The motto behind this is if it hasn't happened on paper, then it couldn't possibly have happened in practice. The only way that they can check whether something has happened is whether there's a paper trail attached to it. If there's no paper trail, it hasn't happened and you can't claim for it. The costs must be direct. This is very simple and very clear, but they must relate to the project. If this is for you to undertake something that is completely unrelated or slightly unrelated even to the project, and it shows up in your final report, they will go like, that trip to the Seychelles, what exact purpose did that have for the sake of the project? Communication costs, promotion costs, so these are the different headings that you will be working under for the project. You'll see on the budget form there's a code for every type of cost. So cost 2.3.1, for example, are costs for the update or the creation of a website. Just because there is a budget line for something doesn't mean that you have to spend it. And at the same time, if there is no budget line for something, but this is something that is incredibly important for the project, you argue it. You say that this is incredibly important for the project. We are going to do this because of that and because of this. Yes, timesheets. Very important to keep timesheets. So if you have a person, a coordinator, artistic director who's spending part of his or her time on the project budget, that proportion of his or her salary can be invoiced to the project, but that means national insurance and on costs as well. You should be changing the person's job description as well. You should also be keeping timesheets if this is a proportion of someone's cost. Subcontracting. Now, subcontracting used to be something evil and something that people had to avoid doing, but of course, in our field, we need to be working with external suppliers for goods and services. You may need to hire in a company that does staging for you because that is part of your festival and you do not have your own staging. That is subcontracting. So if you say, right, £5,000 worth of staging for these events, put that in, but you'll have to tick that this is subcontracting. That means that these are things that are not done by yourself. There are tendering rules. If you are spending more than 60,000 euros on something, you must have, I think it's 3 written quotes of something. There is no threshold for subcontracting, but the idea is that the partners spend the money on directly related project activities rather than sub-granting or passing the money on. And again, this goes into audit questions. If most of the project costs aren't actually spent by the responsible partners, there's a bit of a question of where has the money gone and is this dangerous? So you should try to keep subcontracting on the lower side. Artistic fees are, of course, not subcontracting. Same thing as travel, because you're paying EasyJet to fly 5 people from London to Zagreb. That does not mean subcontracting. Those are just travel costs. Ineligible costs. This is fairly clear and fairly normal, but things such as debts, interest you cannot claim for. I mentioned this, deductible VAT. You cannot claim for VAT and then have it reimbursed by your tax authority after the project. That's not good practice. Very important to know, as we are working with the British pound for the time being, you will have bank costs for receiving or sending money, and loss because of that, or these kinds of costs, you cannot invoice to the project. These are costs that you will have to absorb. Hence the reason for looking at how to have a Euro bank account.